I pulled into my mother's driveway in Fayetteville on a warm June evening in 2024 with the same tightness in my chest I used to feel as a teenager. After 12 years in the Army Military Police, I could walk into a crime scene with less hesitation than I felt walking into the home where I grew up. My mother's house sat only 20 minutes from Fort Liberty, but the emotional distance always felt much farther. I had been summoned for a family dinner, the last one, before my stepbrother Tyler's wedding. My mother Linda said it was important, which usually meant my stepdad Gary wanted something from me. That alone told me trouble waited behind the front door. The moment I stepped into the dining room, I could smell the tension before anyone spoke. Gary Holton sat at the head of the table like he always did. Back, straight, jaw-tight eyes, already scanning for something to criticize. At 58, he still acted like the house belonged solely to him, and everyone else existed to orbit around his mood. Beside him sat Tyler, 26, still somehow holding the aura of a boy who had never been told no in his life. He lifted a glass of wine in my direction, pretending to be playful, but the smirk on his face carried the same disrespect he had thrown at me since I was 14. My mother hovered near the kitchen, trying to keep the peace with soft, nervous gestures I had seen too many times before. "Riley, you made it," she whispered, as if she did not want to disturb the men. I forced a smile, hugged her, and sat down. I barely had time to unfold my napkin before Gary launched his opening shot. Look who decided to show up, the soldier girl, back from playing police on base. He puffed his chest the way insecure men do when they want to feel taller. I answered calmly, "Just here for dinner, Gary." He scoffed loudly. "You think you are so disciplined, so tough, but you are nothing. You have always been nothing." Tyler chuckled into his glass, enjoying the performance. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my hands still on the table. Years of training had taught me how to manage adrenaline. Gary went on, "You know what your problem is, Riley. You think your uniform makes you important, but it does not. Tyler is the real man in this family, not you." My mother tried to intervene. "Gary, please, just sit and eat," but he cut her off with a glare that froze her mid-sentence. The room fell silent except for the quiet ringing in my ears, the kind that comes just before a storm breaks open. Tyler leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine and looking at me as if I were some outsider intruding on his kingdom. "You heard him, Riley. Maybe if you listened to Dad more, you would not be so tense all the time." Something cold slid down my spine. I answered evenly, "Tyler, a grown man, should not need his father to tell him he is a man." Gary slapped his hand on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "Do not talk back, you ungrateful girl. You think you can disrespect us in our home. You think that uniform means anything in this family. You are a failure." Every word was meant to provoke. I recognized the tactic. Escalate, humiliate, corner the target. Tyler straightened as if he sensed his father's rising fury and felt eager to impress him. The smirk vanished, replaced with something meaner. Gary pointed at me, eyes blazing. "Tyler, show her who the real man is." His voice rose until it cracked. "Punch her in the jaw, son. Show her who the man of this house really is." My mother gasped and stepped forward, but Gary barked her back into place with a look sharp enough to cut. Tyler pushed his chair back with a scrape against the hardwood floor. For the first time that evening, the room went truly silent. I stood slowly, keeping my posture relaxed, palms open, breathing steady. Tyler took 2 steps toward me, raising his fist clumsy and angry, fueled by ego and cheap wine. He swung. It was over in 2 seconds. I shifted half a step, redirecting his momentum. My right hand caught his wrist. My left forearm guided his shoulder past its line. His feet lost placement and his weight collapsed forward. A controlled technique taught to every military police soldier. Tyler hit the floor with a thud, his body going slack. He was not harmed beyond the shock of impact, but he was out cold. The entire table froze. My mother covered her mouth. Gary stared wide-eyed, disbelief twisting into rage. I steadied my stance, lowered my hands, and spoke clearly. "Self-defense. Gary, you ordered him to assault me. That is on you." Gary pointed at me, his voice cracking. "I will ruin your career. I swear it." I stepped forward, meeting his glare with calm precision. Good luck with that. You do not know who you are dealing with. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family yet forced to stand your ground, what did you do? Tell me if you feel comfortable. I was born in 1993 in Raleigh, North Carolina, in a small brick house on the east side of the city where the summers stuck to your skin and the winters felt sharper than they looked. My earliest memories are of my mother and me living a simple, quiet life. She worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic and came home every day smelling faintly of mint and paper files. We never had much, but we had peace. That ended when I turned 14. That was the year my mother remarried. His name was Gary Holton, and he came into our lives like a cold front sweeping through a warm room. At first, he acted charming and helpful, offering to fix things around the house, talking about responsibility and order and how a family needed structure. But within months, it became clear that structure really meant control and responsibility meant whatever suited him in the moment. I felt the shift before my mother did. He started telling her what clothes looked appropriate, what friends she should not see, and how often she needed to report where she was. She brushed it off as him being protective, but I knew better even as a teenager. I knew what dominance disguised as care looked like. It was the tone, sharp, final, no discussion. Then came Tyler, Gary's son, 2 years older than me and already carrying the smug superiority of a boy who had been told he was special his whole life. When he moved in at 16, the house changed again. He treated me like an intruder in my own home. He would shove past me in the hallway, eat the food in the fridge that I had set aside, mock my clothes, my homework, my goals. Anything he could do to get a reaction, he would do. Gary never corrected him. On the contrary, he encouraged it. He believed boys needed to be tough and girls needed to know their place. His words, not mine. My mother withdrew more and more each year. She smiled less. She apologized more. She tried to protect me where she could, but Gary always found a way to twist things until she doubted herself. The worst part was seeing how small she became the woman who once laughed easily now walking through her own home as if she were trespassing. By 17, I knew I needed out. I needed a path that would allow me to leave the house, climb out of the psychological quicksand, and build a life that was mine. The military was that path. I still remember the night I told my mother. We were sitting at the kitchen table while Gary and Tyler watched television in the living room. I whispered, "I think I'm going to enlist." My mother froze spoon halfway to her mouth. Her eyes filled with fear, then pride, then fear again. "Are you sure, Riley?" "You are so young." I nodded. I wanted discipline, purpose, and more than anything, I wanted distance. Gary hated the idea. He said only men belonged in the military. He said I would quit on the first day. He said the uniform would break me. His disapproval only hardened my resolve. I went to the recruiter's office the next morning. 3 months later, I shipped out to boot camp. Boot camp hit like a freight train, but it was the best kind of impact. For the first time in my life, no one cared who my stepfather was. No one cared about family dynamics or social dominance or power games. All that mattered was effort, discipline, teamwork. If you pushed, you earned respect. If you slacked, you got corrected. I thrived under that clarity. After basic training, I attended advanced individual training for the Military Police Corps, where I spent long days learning everything from traffic regulation to detainee operations to crime scene security to unarmed combat techniques. It was hard, the kind of hard that burns away the weak parts and leaves behind something stronger. I realized something important. Justice was not just a concept or a word or a promise. It was a responsibility. It required action. It required presence. It required someone willing to stand in the doorway when others ran. That idea resonated with me more deeply than I expected. It felt like the opposite of my childhood home, where unfairness reigned unchecked. In the Army, every rule had purpose, every role had weight, every decision had consequences. I chose to become military police, not because I wanted authority, but because I wanted clarity. I wanted to protect those who could not protect themselves. Maybe part of me wanted to protect the girl I used to be. When I graduated from MP school, I received my orders for Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty. It became the place where I grew into myself. Gate duty taught me alertness. Vehicle checks taught me attention to detail. Domestic disturbance responses taught me patience. Security patrols taught me composure under pressure. Some nights I responded to drunk soldiers arguing with their spouses. Other nights I guarded aircraft on the tarmac under the sound of distant artillery training. I learned that the strongest soldiers were often the quietest. The most dangerous were the ones who did not need to prove anything. Over time, I became one of them. I built a reputation for staying calm in chaos, for making level-headed choices, for applying force only when necessary. That professionalism earned me respect on base, but it also created distance from my family. They had no interest in understanding my world. To them, I was still the girl who should stay quiet at the dinner table, the girl who was never good enough, the girl who had gotten above herself. The years passed. I grew sharper, steadier, stronger. I rose to the rank of captain and took pride in every stripe earned. But no matter how much distance I put between myself and that house in Fayetteville, the past had a way of circling back. In 2024, my mother called and asked me to come home for an important family dinner. I knew it was a mistake to say yes. But family, even toxic family, had a pull that was hard to ignore. I did not know it yet, but that dinner would be the night when the quiet warrior I had spent years becoming would finally meet the girl who once lived in fear under Gary's roof. And only one of us would walk out unchanged. Driving back into Fayetteville in 2024 felt like stepping into an old photograph that had faded in all the wrong places. The city had changed in small ways, but it still carried the familiar mix of military energy and Southern weariness. Soldiers in uniform walked near gas stations on Skibo Road. The smell of fried food from Ramsey Street drifted through my open window. Every landmark reminded me how close I was to Fort Liberty, the place where I had built a career and the home I had chosen for myself. But as I turned south toward my mother's neighborhood, that sense of control began to slip. The older houses sat close together under heavy pine trees, their porches sagging slightly the way they had for decades. It was the kind of area where neighbors watched from behind curtains and gossip traveled faster than weather alerts. My mother still lived in the same beige house where I had spent my teenage years, the house that had slowly become smaller and quieter as Gary's presence grew louder. The moment I parked in the driveway and saw my mother's car, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. She had asked me to come home for a family dinner. Her voice had trembled when she made the request. She said it was important. She said she needed me there. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I took leave from base and drove over, telling myself I could survive one evening. When my mother opened the door, the first thing I noticed was how much older she looked. Her smile was warm, but her eyes told a different story. Shadows of exhaustion sat beneath them, as if years of gaslighting and emotional pressure had carved their mark. She hugged me tightly like someone clinging to a life raft. "I'm so glad you made it," she whispered. I stepped inside and immediately felt the weight of the house press against me. The air smelled faintly of burnt meat and stale beer. The hallway lights were dim. A television blared from the living room with the volume far too loud, the way Gary always kept it a constant background roar meant to signal his presence and importance. I put down my bag and scanned the room. Gary sat in his recliner, occupying the entire space with the kind of confidence only a man who never gets challenged can hold. He was watching the news and muttering at the screen something about how the world had gone soft. When he saw me, he did not bother to hide his annoyance. "So the soldier finally shows up," he said, leaning back with his arms crossed. He used the word soldier like it was an insult. I offered a simple greeting. "Gary," he snorted. "That uniform treating you well, or are they tired of you barking orders at people?" He did not know anything about my job, but that had never stopped him from acting like he understood it better than I did. I ignored the bait and looked around for Tyler. My mother answered before I had to ask. "He is in the dining room setting up the table. You know he has his big wedding coming up." She said it with forced excitement, hoping I would play along. When I walked into the dining room, I found Tyler arranging plates while talking loudly on the phone. He was bragging about venue options, catering prices, and how he would soon have the wedding of the year. When he noticed me, he hung up and gave me a look that landed somewhere between smug and desperate. "Riley?" "Good to see you," he said, stretching the words as if he were doing me a favor by speaking them. "Getting ready for the big day?" I asked politely. He puffed up instantly. "Absolutely. It is going to be incredible. Biggest event this town has seen. Real classy. Only problem is we are still figuring out a few financial details, but that is what family is for." He tapped his chest proudly. My mother flinched at his words but said nothing. She moved around the kitchen quietly preparing food while trying not to make any noise that might irritate Gary. I could almost sense her walking on invisible eggshells. When she placed dishes on the table, her hands shook slightly. Gary wandered in as we sat down. He slapped his palm on the back of Tyler's chair, announcing himself like a king taking his throne. "All right, since everyone is finally here, let us get to business." His tone made it clear this was not a dinner. It was a meeting he intended to run. Tyler perked up instantly, eager for approval. My mother lowered her gaze. I braced myself. Gary took a long breath like he was preparing to deliver a lecture. "As you know, Tyler is getting married soon, a big event, important for the family. Something we can all be proud of." He paused and looked at me with deliberate emphasis. "And as the only one in this house with a steady income beyond basic pay, we expect you to contribute." I frowned. "Contribute to what?" "Exactly." Gary rolled his eyes. "Do not play dumb. The wedding. You make good money. You are military police for crying out loud. You can spare 15,000. The absurdity hit me so hard I actually laughed. 15,000 for a wedding I have nothing to do with. Gary slammed his fist on the table and pointed at me. "You listen here, young lady. I am the man of this house. When I say family steps up, family steps up. You owe us that much for everything we have done for you." "Everything you have done for me," I repeated quietly. I thought about the years of belittlement, the insults, the control, the suffocating environment that drove me into the army. My mother whispered, "Please, Gary, let us just eat," but he ignored her. Tyler leaned back, acting offended. "Come on, Riley. I need this. I cannot start my marriage in debt. And besides, you do not even have real expenses. You have no kids, no husband, nothing. Just you and that base." The room went still. My mother stared at her plate. Gary glared at me, waiting for obedience. I kept my voice steady. "I am not paying for your wedding. Not $1. The silence that followed felt as thick as wet cement. And I knew then that this dinner was never about family. It was about pressure. It was about dominance. It was about testing whether I would fall back into the role they had cast me in as a child. But I was not that girl anymore. And they were about to learn that in a way none of us could have predicted. Gary stared at me with the kind of expression a man uses when he is used to winning by force, not reason. His jaw clenched, his shoulders squared, and his voice dropped into that low warning tone he had perfected over the years. "I said $15,000, Riley. Family duty. A real daughter would understand that." I kept my face calm the same way I did during tense responses on base. "I am not responsible for Tyler's wedding," I replied. The words were simple, factual, but they carried a weight that clearly irritated him. He slapped his hand on the table so hard the plates jumped. My mother flinched as if struck by the noise. "Do not disrespect me," he shouted. "I am the head of this house. When I say, you help, you help." I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. "Gary, this is not my house. I moved out when I was 18. I have my own career, my own life, and I am not obligated to pay for a wedding that has nothing to do with me." Tyler snorted from across the table. He pushed his chair back and crossed his arms the way he used to in high school when he wanted to provoke a fight. "Look at her acting all superior now, the useless cop in uniform." My mother whispered, "Tyler, please," but her voice carried no weight. "It never had in this house." Gary puffed up even more, fueled by the insult. "See, this is what I mean. She walks around like she is better than everyone. Wearing that uniform does not make you special, Riley. It just makes you bossy." My pulse stayed steady. Years of training made that possible, but inside I felt the old familiar pressure, the suffocating sense of being cornered in a space where logic had no power. I leaned forward slightly enough to show confidence but not aggression. "Legally," I said evenly, "I am not required to support or fund any part of this wedding. North Carolina law does not obligate stepchildren to pay family expenses. And even if it did, I still would not pay. Gary's eyes widened with fury at the word legally. He hated when anyone challenged him with facts. He preferred control that relied on fear, not reality. "You think quoting the law makes you smart?" he snapped. "You have no loyalty. You never have." Tyler chimed in louder this time. "She is acting tough because she plays soldier on base all day. Take that badge away and she is still the same scared girl who used to run to her room whenever Dad got upset." That word Dad made my stomach twist. Gary was never my father. He was an intruder who built a throne in a house that did not belong to him. My mother whispered enough, trying again to keep the peace. Her hands trembled so visibly she had to grip her napkin. I felt a sharp pang of sympathy for her, but also frustration. All these years, and she still folded every time he raised his voice. He thrived on that. Gary leaned forward, elbows on the table, trying to stare me down. "You will give that money," he said with slow emphasis, "because this family needs it and you owe this family." "No," I said. My tone was quiet, but final. It was the same voice I used when giving lawful commands during tense domestic disturbances. The table went silent. Tyler scoffed loudly. "Wow, she really thinks she is somebody. You are nothing without that uniform. You hear me? Nothing. And your army job does not impress anyone. A real soldier would know loyalty." I gave him a long, calm look. The kind of look that made suspects on base rethink their choices. Tyler shifted in his chair, uncomfortable but trying not to show it. Gary pointed at me again, his finger stabbing the air. "You will give that money, or I will make sure people on your base know you are unstable. You think I cannot ruin your career? I know people. You forget who you are talking to." I knew exactly who I was talking to. A man who had no real power anywhere except this house. A man who had spent years inflating his ego by shrinking the people around him. A man who used volume as authority and intimidation as influence. But he did not scare me anymore. I said nothing, just held his stare until he looked away. That only made him angrier. He shoved his chair back and stood up, pacing like a man searching for an excuse to explode. My mother rushed to him, gently placing a hand on his arm. "Gary, please. She is tired, she just got here. Let us eat and talk calmly." He shrugged her off so hard she stumbled. I stood halfway, but she raised a quick hand, telling me silently not to intervene. The gesture broke my heart. She had been trained over the years to manage him the same way a person manages a storm, shutting windows, bracing for impact, and hoping it passes quickly. Tyler rolled his eyes dramatically. "Mom, stop babying her. She needs to be taught some respect. You should have let me handle her back then." I caught the look he gave me. A look that was not just disrespect, but hostility, like he was itching to provoke something. Every instinct in my body sharpened. Microaggression, escalation, pre-confrontation cues. My military training kicked in automatically, analyzing space exits' proximity angles. This dinner was turning into something volatile, something dangerous. My mother tried again to calm things, but her voice cracked under the strain. I watched her take a breath, steady herself, and try to act normal. But normal was impossible in a house ruled by a man who believed control was his birthright. As the tension stretched tighter, I recognized the feeling creeping up my spine. It was the same sensation I had felt on certain calls on base. The quiet before the fight. The shift in the air when a threat is coming. I had survived far worse than raised voices and childish insults. But I could feel something brewing in this house, something that had been waiting years for a spark. And I knew without any doubt that spark was coming. It was only a matter of time before the night would erupt and everything in this house would change forever. The moment Gary shouted for Tyler to hit me, something in the air changed. It felt like the house inhaled sharply, as if preparing for the impact before it even happened. My training kicked in automatically. Every instinct I had developed over years of military police work sharpened my awareness. I watched Tyler's stance shift his feet, planting unevenly the way untrained fighters do when they rely on anger instead of skill. His shoulders rose, his grip tightened, and his jaw flexed. a classic sign of a person preparing to throw a reckless punch. I did not move yet. Movement too early can escalate a situation. Movement too late can get you hurt. I let my body settle into a neutral stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight distributed evenly so I could pivot in any direction. My hands stayed open, visible, and relaxed. Anyone trained in self-defense understands the difference between readiness and aggression. Readiness is quiet, controlled, invisible to most people. Tyler took his first step toward me, his chest puffed out in false confidence. He kept glancing at Gary, clearly performing for his approval. That would be his biggest mistake. He drew his arm back, the fist tightening the elbow flared far too wide. A telegraphed punch, slow, predictable. The kind of punch we train new soldiers to avoid because it wastes energy and exposes the entire body. Gary barked, "Keep going, Tyler. Show her what a real man does." My mother gasped. I felt her fear before I heard it, but it was too late to calm her. The situation was already moving. Tyler lunged, trying to swing at my jaw exactly as Gary had ordered. In that split second, my world narrowed into pure technique. Nothing emotional, nothing personal. Just assessment and response. I took a controlled half-step backward, a tactical step designed to redirect force rather than meet it. My heel stayed planted long enough to give me leverage and then shifted lightly on the hardwood floor. His fist cut through the air where my face had been a moment earlier. As his momentum carried forward, I rotated my torso just enough to guide his movement past me, not stopping him, but redirecting him. This is the foundation of unarmed combat use, the attacker's force against them. Do not push back, reframe the energy. As he stumbled forward, trying to regain balance, I raised my left hand and caught his wrist in a firm grip. Not crushing, not twisting yet, just anchoring. The surprise on his face flashed for an instant. Inexperience reveals itself in moments like that. He tried to pull away. Wrong move. With his center of gravity tilted forward, his weight already unstable, I shifted my right foot behind his leg. A simple placement. Nothing complex. I rotated his wrist gently, applying pressure along the natural line of the joint. His body followed the motion involuntarily. His own force took him down. No strike. No harmful impact from me, just redirection. His shoulder folded inward and his body collapsed onto the floor. A dull thud echoed through the dining room, followed by a stunned gasp from my mother. Tyler lay on his side, dazed. For a brief moment, everything went silent. Time stretched thin, like the world was trying to process what had just happened. Gary's eyes widened as if the scene contradicted everything he believed about control and dominance. I straightened my posture, letting my hands lower calmly to my sides. My breathing stayed even. My stance remained neutral but firm, the way we are taught to stand after a defensive maneuver ready for whatever comes next. I checked Tyler with a quick glance. He was not hurt beyond the shock of falling. His pride took the worst of it. Gary's face twisted rapidly from shock to humiliation to rage. "You attacked him!" he shouted, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You snapped. I watched you." My voice stayed steady. "He tried to hit me. You ordered him to hit me. I defended myself. North Carolina is a stand-your-ground state. I am well within my rights." Gary's face reddened. He hated hearing the law used correctly, especially when it protected someone he wanted to dominate. He stomped forward, leaning over the table. "You think you can lecture me about the law?" he growled. "You come into my house and embarrass my son." My mother stepped between us, trembling so visibly her fingers shook against the fabric of her shirt. "Gary, please stop. She will leave. Let us calm down." He ignored her. His eyes stayed locked on me, brimming with the kind of fury that comes from years of failed control finally being challenged. I never raised my voice. "Gary." I said clearly, "You escalated the situation. You gave a verbal order for your adult son to strike me. He attempted to act on that order. I used minimal force to stop an assault. It was over in seconds. That is the truth." Tyler groaned from the floor, slowly trying to push himself up. He looked around in confusion as if the world had betrayed him. Gary pointed at me again, shaking with fury. "I will ruin your career. he shouted. "I swear it, Riley. I will tell everyone you attacked him for no reason. You think being military police protects you. It makes you a target." I did not step back. I refused to let him shrink my space. "Good luck with that," I answered calmly. My voice carried the same tone I used during tense arrests. The tone that says I know what I am doing. The tone that says I am not afraid. "You do not know who you are dealing with." My mother whispered, "Stop, both of you, please," but neither of us looked at her. The air felt electric. Something had been set in motion, something that could not be undone. Gary stared at me, breathing harshly, shaking with the frustration of a man watching his power slip through his fingers. Tyler sat on the floor, humiliated, his pride bruised more than his body, and I stood in the center of it all, calm, steady, grounded in training and truth. I did not yet know just how far Gary would go to regain control. Not yet, but the first spark had been lit, and once a spark catches flame, there is no going back. For a long moment after Tyler hit the floor, no one moved. The only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the old wall clock above the kitchen doorway. My mother stood frozen, her hands trembling at her sides. Tyler groaned softly, starting to regain consciousness but still too disoriented to sit up. And Gary stared at me with a look that blended outrage, humiliation, and something darker. Then he snapped. He lunged for his phone, snatched it off the counter, and jabbed the screen with his thumb. "I am calling the police," he shouted. "You assaulted my son. You attacked him unprovoked." I folded my arms loosely and kept my voice calm. "That is not what happened, Gary. You know that." He barked a laugh full of bitterness. "You think anyone will believe you? They will believe the man of this house." My mother rushed toward him. "Gary, please do not escalate this. Tyler is fine. Please stop before this gets worse." But he shoved her aside with his shoulder, not hard, but rough enough to make her stumble against the table. That was enough to send a small pulse of anger through me, though I kept it contained. He pressed the phone to his ear, pacing the kitchen like a restless storm. "Yes. I need officers at my house immediately. My stepdaughter assaulted my son. She is dangerous. She is unstable. She needs to be taken in." I could hear the dispatcher even from across the room asking questions. He answered each one with dramatic embellishment, emphasizing the danger he claimed I posed. When he hung up, he turned back to me with triumph in his eyes, as if he expected me to panic. I did not. Instead, I sat down slowly at the table, hands visible, posture relaxed, the way we are taught to do during any official contact. "You will not be so calm when they get here," he sneered. "I hope you enjoy losing that army job you worship so much. You are done, completely done." My mother whispered, "Riley, please say something," but I shook my head gently. There was nothing to say. The truth was already on my side. 15 minutes later, 2 police cruisers pulled into the driveway, their headlights cutting through the evening light. Gary straightened his shirt chest, lifting with false pride. "See," he muttered, "time to put you in your place." When the officers stepped inside, I recognized one of them instantly. Officer Ruiz, a calm man in his late 40s who had handled multiple joint responses with military police near the base perimeter. We had spoken before on several domestic calls where soldiers needed mediation or transport. He nodded at me with quiet recognition. "Captain Monroe," he said. "Evening." Gary rushed forward before I could speak. "Officer, thank God you are here. Arrest her immediately." She went crazy. "She knocked my son out. Look at him." Tyler sat slumped in the dining chair, now fully awake but nursing his pride more than anything else. Ruiz assessed him briefly, then turned back to me. "Captain, are you hurt?" he asked. "No, sir," I answered calmly, and I did not strike anyone. I redirected an incoming attack. Minimal force. Self-defense. Ruiz looked between us, scanning the scene. The second officer, a younger man, scribbled notes on a pad. Ruiz asked Gary, "Sir, what exactly happened?" Gary began spinning a story so exaggerated it bordered on ridiculous. He claimed I had snapped out of nowhere, thrown Tyler across the room, and attacked him without reason. He insisted I was unstable and violent. Ruiz nodded slowly, but his expression did not change. He had heard plenty of false dramatics in his career. Then he turned to Tyler. Son, what happened? Tyler rubbed his jaw, embarrassed. She grabbed me wrong. I tripped. I do not know. He refused to make eye contact with Ruiz. That told its own story. Ruiz asked me, Captain, describe your actions. I explained concisely the same way I would file an incident report. Tyler advanced toward me with a raised fist. I stepped back, redirected the momentum, assisted his fall. No strikes delivered. Ruiz asked, Did you feel threatened? Yes, sir. He intended to cause harm. Ruiz nodded again. He had seen similar situations dozens of times. Then he asked something only an officer who understood military culture would ask. Captain, are you currently active duty MP? Yes. Fort Liberty. He glanced at his partner. That explained a lot. He knew the level of training involved. He turned back to Gary. Sir, do you have any evidence she attacked your son without provocation? Gary sputtered. Evidence? I do not need evidence. I saw it. I told him to handle her because she was being disrespectful. Ruiz raised a brow. You told him to handle her. Gary froze, realizing too late that he had said the wrong thing. Ruiz exhaled slowly. Sir, based on the information provided, this appears to be mutual confrontation, initiated by your son and responded to lawfully by your stepdaughter. North Carolina is a stand-your-ground state. She had the right to defend herself. Gary's face twisted in outrage. You are taking her side because she is military. Ruiz kept his voice neutral. I am following the law. Tyler needs medical evaluation, but there is no basis for arrest. My mother let out a small sob of relief. Gary, however, erupted. This is ridiculous! She humiliated my son. She humiliated me. Ruiz remained composed. Sir, step away from her. Step away from your wife as well. You are agitated. He said it gently but firmly. Gary shoved a chair aside, his face red with fury. This is not over. I will take this higher. I will go to her command. I will go to the news. Everyone will know how crazy she is. Ruiz placed a hand near his holster, not gripping it but reminding Gary of boundaries. Sir, sit down. Final warning. Gary backed off just enough to avoid being removed. Paramedics arrived to check on Tyler, whose only injury was wounded pride. They loaded him onto a stretcher mostly because he insisted he needed professional documentation of his suffering. My mother cried quietly in the kitchen, wiping her face with shaky hands. Ruiz walked over to me. Captain, you handled yourself well. Next time, call us sooner if you see signs of escalation. I nodded. Thank you, officer. When they left the house, silence settled again, but it was not peaceful. It was the silence before a deeper storm. Gary glared at me with a hatred that felt almost personal, a threat simmering beneath the surface. His authority had been challenged, his power exposed as hollow. And a man like Gary does not forgive humiliation. I could feel it. The night was far from over. The officers had barely driven away when Gary stormed through the living room, muttering under his breath like a man trying to rearrange reality to protect his pride. He paced in hard, angry circles the way he did whenever someone dared to stand up to him. My mother stayed near the kitchen doorway, clutching a dish towel like a lifeline while her eyes darted between us, hoping the situation would simply dissolve into silence. But men like Gary do not cool down. They plot. They rehearse. They search for the next angle where they can regain control. I could almost feel the gears twisting inside his head, and I knew exactly where he would go next. When a controlling man cannot win in his home, he tries to win somewhere else, especially by attacking the thing he thinks matters most to you. My career. He finally stopped pacing and glared at me with a grin that belonged on someone who had convinced himself he had already won the next battle. You think the police siding with you means anything he said. You think this is over. You embarrassed me in my own house. You humiliated my son. Do you understand how that looks? He spoke as if someone had filmed the entire evening and broadcast it to the whole town. His obsession with appearances had always been stronger than his sense of reality. I sat calmly at the table, keeping my breathing steady the way I did during difficult interrogations. Gary leaned closer, eyes narrowing. I know how to deal with you. You act like you are untouchable because you wear that uniform, but you are not. Not to your command team. Not when they hear what you really are. There it was, the plan. I recognized it instantly. He would try to weaponize the army against me because he believed institutions existed to enforce his version of order. He did not understand that the military functions on facts, not tantrums. But ignorance never stopped him before. My mother whispered, Gary, please do not do this, but he ignored her entirely. He walked to the counter, grabbed his phone, and began typing aggressively. What are you doing? I asked, even though I already knew. Reporting you, he said, to your base, to whoever is in charge. They will know what kind of danger you are. The army does not want unstable people carrying guns. I felt heat rise inside me, not from fear, but from irritation. Not at the threat, but at the predictability of it. Men like him always followed the same script. Accuse the person who defended herself. Pretend they were the victim. Try to damage her reputation. I said calmly, that will not work, Gary. The army requires evidence, not loud claims. He smirked. Oh, I have evidence. I will tell them you snapped and attacked Tyler. I will tell them you have anger issues. I will tell them you threatened me too. You think they will take your side over mine? Yes, I said simply. Because they know me. He stopped for a second, thrown off by my confidence. Then the anger returned. He dialed a number with exaggerated purpose, pressing each button like he wanted the phone to feel his fury. He walked into the living room, pacing again, phone to his ear. My mother looked at me with fear, draining the color from her face. Riley, he cannot hurt your job, can he? I put a hand gently on her shoulder. He cannot do anything without proof. She exhaled shakily, but the worry stayed in her eyes. A few minutes passed before Gary returned wearing a triumphant smirk that made my stomach tighten. I left a message for your commanding officer, he announced. I told him everything, and I will call again. Then I will call higher. Someone will listen. Someone will take you down a peg. My jaw clenched, though I kept my tone even. That is harassment, Gary. You understand that. He laughed. You do not get to lecture me about law. You might fool those officers, but I know who you are. A violent girl pretending to be a soldier. My mother whispered, stop, but he talked over her again. He raised his voice, pacing faster as if convincing himself of the story he was building. You are dangerous, he said. I have seen how you get when you are angry. You have always been unstable, and when I tell your command that they will have no choice but to investigate. And when they investigate, they will find reasons to doubt you. Everyone has something to hide. He stepped closer. Do you? My eyes held his steadily. No, but do you? His face twitched, a tiny flicker, a sign that he had secrets, maybe financial ones, maybe personal ones. I tucked the reaction away for later, like a note in a case file. He waved his hand dismissively and stormed toward the kitchen. My mother stepped aside, trembling as he brushed past her. He opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, yanked off the cap, and drank half of it in one pull. Then he pointed the bottle toward me. You think you are so smart. But you do not get it. I run this house. I decide what family means. If I tell them you attacked Tyler, they will believe me. You are nothing without that badge. You hear me? Nothing. The room fell silent. Only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the space. Tyler groaned from the couch where the paramedics had left him. He held an ice pack to his head and looked at his father with glazed eyes. Dad, maybe we should just stop. I am fine. But Gary waved him off. No. She needs to learn she cannot walk in here acting above us. She needs consequences. My mother looked like she might collapse. Her voice cracked as she whispered, Gary, please. You are scaring me. He stared at her with that cold expression he used whenever she tried to speak against him, an expression that made her shrink instantly. That was when something inside me hardened. I had seen this look before on domestic calls. The look of a man who believed he owned the room, the people, the truth. A man who did not stop until someone drew a boundary he could not cross. And I realized in that moment that this was going to escalate far beyond a phone call. Gary did not want justice. He wanted revenge. He wanted to punish me for refusing to be the frightened girl who stayed in her room. He wanted to restore the hierarchy he believed belonged to him. But I also saw something else in his eyes. Panic, the kind that comes from losing control in front of witnesses. The police refusing to arrest me had wounded his pride. Tyler collapsing on the floor after a clumsy attack had wounded it even more. And nothing enrages a controlling man faster than humiliation. The next words he spoke confirmed it. "I will not let this go," he said through gritted teeth. "I will destroy your reputation. I will make sure everyone sees who you really are." There was more he wanted to say, things he wanted to threaten, but he stopped because at that moment a different realization crossed his face. He had said too much in front of me. He had revealed more than he intended, and he knew it. He stormed off toward his bedroom, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. My mother sagged against the counter, wiping tears from her eyes. I walked over and steadied her gently. She whispered, "Why does he hate you so much?" I shook my head. "It is not hate. It is fear." She looked confused. "Fear of what?" I answered quietly. "Fear of the truth. Because once truth starts to crack through a house like this, everything he built on control will collapse." I glanced toward the hallway where Gary had disappeared, and I knew this was only the beginning. He would come back harder. He would dig deeper. He would lash out in every direction until something broke. And when men like him feel their power slipping, they make mistakes. Mistakes that open the door for everything they have tried to hide to finally be exposed. I reported back to Fort Liberty the next morning, running on barely 4 hours of sleep, but fueled by a sense of alertness that never fully left me after any confrontation. The sun was still low over the training fields when I parked near the military police headquarters and walked inside. Soldiers moved through the hallways in quiet rhythms. Boots, steady radios crackling with early morning updates. It was familiar grounding and predictable in a way my mother's house had never been. But the moment I stepped into my office, I sensed something was off. Staff Sergeant Nolan glanced up from his desk with an expression that was too careful. He cleared his throat softly. "Captain Monroe, you are requested in the company commander's office." His tone was neutral, but the undercurrent was clear. Something was happening. I thanked him and made my way down the hall, the soles of my boots echoing louder than usual against the tile. When I knocked and stepped inside, Captain Alden was already waiting, standing behind his desk with his arms crossed. He was a calm man in his late 30s, known for fairness and an ability to separate truth from theatrics. The moment he looked at me, I knew someone had reached him. "Monroe," he said, shutting the door behind me. "I think we need to talk." I stood at attention, but he motioned for me to relax. "Sit." I did. He remained standing, a habit he had when conversations took on a serious tone. "Someone has contacted the command chain about you." He paused for emphasis. "Someone outside the military." My face stayed calm, though my heartbeat lifted slightly. Gary had wasted no time. He continued, "The call came late last night. The individual claimed you assaulted a civilian family member, that you have a history of aggressive behavior, that you may be unstable." He watched me carefully, gauging my reaction. I kept my voice controlled. "Sir, the person who called is my stepfather. He is retaliating because his son attempted to strike me and I defended myself." Alden nodded slowly. "That is consistent with what we suspected. But any allegation concerning military police is taken seriously. You know that." I did. MP soldiers must maintain a level of professionalism far above average. Every report, every call, every incident is scrutinized. He continued, "Because of your position, the call triggered an internal review. Not an accusation, just a mandatory check." I nodded. "Understood, sir." He sat down, finally folding his hands. "Tell me exactly what happened." I gave him a concise, factual description. No emotion, no embellishment. Just the sequence of events. Gary encouraged Tyler to strike me. Tyler attempted to follow through. I took a tactical step backward, redirected the momentum, and assisted his fall. Minimal force. No strikes. Alden listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "Do you have any evidence to support your account?" "Yes, sir." "Body camera footage." His brows lifted slightly. "You were wearing it off duty." I nodded. I had been coming back from a security observation shift earlier that afternoon and had not yet dropped it off at HQ. I usually did so at the start of the next duty block, which meant the camera had captured everything the moment I entered my mother's home. He exhaled with something that felt like relief. Footage changes everything. It provides clarity. Bring it to the Internal Affairs section immediately. We will review it together. I retrieved the device from my locker and headed to the Internal Review Office where Sergeant First Class Harlow greeted me. She was a woman who trusted evidence over words and who could dissect video footage like a surgeon. I handed her the device and gave her the timestamp. Within minutes, she had the video on her monitor, the incident playing from the moment I stepped into the dining room to the moment Tyler hit the floor. The audio was clear. Gary's voice filled the small office loud and unmistakable. "Punch her in the jaw, son. Show her who the man of this house really is." Harlow paused the video and raised an eyebrow at me. "That is your stepfather." "Yes." She shook her head slightly. "And he called your command, claiming you initiated everything." "Yes." She resumed the playback. "The moment Tyler charged at me was captured perfectly. The swing, my tactical step back, the redirection of his momentum, the fall. Clean, controlled, self-defense from start to finish." When the video ended, Harlow leaned back in her chair, studying me with a sharp, thoughtful expression. "Captain, this footage fully supports your account. There is no aggression on your part, no misconduct, no excessive force. If anything, it shows remarkable restraint." I nodded once. "Thank you, Sergeant." She transferred the file into the official system, tagging it for review. "Your command will see this," she said. "And when they do, these allegations will collapse." I felt tension leave my shoulders, though only slightly, because I knew Gary. He was not the type to give up after one failure. Alden reviewed the footage next, analyzing every detail. When it was over, he closed the screen and said calmly, "Monroe, this clears you. Completely. Based on this recording and the officer's statements from last night, there is no violation, no questionable conduct, and no cause for concern." He paused and added, "And frankly, your stepfather's call now appears malicious." I maintained professionalism, but inside I felt the weight lift. "Thank you, sir." He studied me carefully. "You need to be aware," he said. "If someone like this continues calling, making accusations, or attempting to involve the military, it can become harassment. And if he tries to escalate, we will handle it through legal channels." I appreciated his words more than he knew, because this was not simply about protecting my record. It was about understanding the battlefield. The Army now knew who Gary was. They knew his methods, and they knew he was willing to lie to regain power. The truth was on record, and the truth was a stronger weapon than anything he could fabricate. As I left the office and walked back across the compound, the morning sun was higher, casting long shadows across the pavement. Soldiers ran drills in the distance, shouting cadence. Trucks rolled past with their engines humming. Everything was steady, predictable, structured. Everything Gary was not. Yet as I stepped outside, a strange certainty settled over me. He would not back down. He would escalate because his pride demanded it. And if he pushed harder, then the things he was trying to hide would eventually surface. Secrets do not survive under pressure. They crack. And when they crack, the truth spills into every corner. I tightened my gloves and headed to my patrol vehicle, knowing that the next confrontation with Gary was not a matter of if, but when. When the internal review at Fort Liberty cleared me, I should have felt relief. I should have felt safe returning to normal duties, knowing the Army trusted my judgment, and the truth was documented in black and white. But instead of easing my mind, the clearance sharpened something inside me. It told me what I had suspected all along. If Gary was willing to lie to the military to ruin my career, then there was more beneath the surface. Attempts like his rarely come from a single burst of anger. They come from fear. Fear of being exposed, fear of consequences, fear of losing control. That realization made everything snap into focus. When someone fights that hard to destroy your credibility, it is usually because they are terrified of what you might reveal about them. So I began to look more closely at the patterns I had noticed but never investigated. Small things from my teenage years came back to me. Receipts tucked into drawers my mother never used. envelopes addressed to Gary from lenders I did not recognize, late-night phone calls where he spoke in harsh whispers, my mother standing at the sink afterward wringing her hands. For years, I had assumed those moments were part of the emotional storms that always followed him, but now, with his threats still echoing in my mind, I saw them for what they could have been: warning signs of something larger, something financial, something hidden. I visited my mother 2 days later on a quiet afternoon when Tyler was still recovering and Gary had gone out. She opened the door with her usual gentle smile, but it did not reach her eyes. I stepped inside and immediately sensed the tension clinging to the house like humidity. "Mom, I need to talk to you," I said. She nodded nervously. "Is it about the other night?" I shook my head. "It is about something different." I led her to the kitchen table, the same place where all our confrontations seemed to happen. She sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the chair. I asked a simple question. "Do you have access to your bank accounts?" She blinked, confused. "Of course I do. Why would you ask that? Can you check them?" She hesitated but reached for her purse, pulling out a small, worn notebook where she kept her passwords. She opened her laptop and logged in. When the page loaded, her eyes widened. The balance was far lower than it should have been. She covered her mouth. "Oh my God, that cannot be right." I leaned over gently. "How long has this been going on?" She shook her head, trembling. "I do not know. Gary handles the bills. He pays everything. He said it would stress me out." I felt anger simmer under my ribs. Men like Gary always used the same script. Control the money, control the narrative, control the person. I asked her to open another account. Savings. That one too was nearly empty. She looked up at me, horror growing in her eyes. "Riley, what is happening?" I kept my voice steady. "When did Gary take over the finances?" She thought back. "After Tyler moved in. Gary said it made sense for him to manage everything. He said men should deal with money, and he said I was too soft-hearted." She winced. I never questioned it. I did not want to make him angry. I squeezed her hand gently. "It is not your fault, but we need to know exactly what is going on." Over the next hour, I combed through her bank statements using the skills I had learned from years of writing incident reports and tracking patterns on base. It did not take long for the picture to emerge. Large, unexplained withdrawals. Transfers to accounts my mother did not recognize. Payments to lenders she had never approved. And most disturbing of all, several loan statements addressed to Gary but tied to the property where she lived. Loans with high interest rates. Loans that suggested desperation. I looked up slowly. "Mom, did you know the house is under a second mortgage?" She stared blankly. "A second mortgage? What do you mean?" I met her eyes. "The house is being used as collateral for loans. More than one." She shook her head over and over as if trying to deny reality. "He said he refinanced to lower the payment. That was the story he told." My stomach dropped. Refinancing was the perfect cover for predatory loans. It sounded helpful, but it was built on deception. "There is more," I said quietly. "Tyler is involved too." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I pointed to a series of transfers labeled T. Holton. "Payments going out every month. Tyler has debt. A lot of it. Your accounts are paying part of it." She covered her face with both hands. "Oh my Lord. Riley, how did I not see this?" "Because he made sure you would not," I said gently. "That is how control works. Not all at once. Little by little." I stood and paced slowly the same way I did on patrol when piecing together a scene. Everything made sense now. Gary had not just been controlling, he had been hiding something, and my presence that night had threatened his ability to keep hiding it. That was why he reacted so violently. That was why he tried to destroy my military record. If I looked deeper, I could expose the whole structure he had built, and that terrified him. My mother whispered, "What do we do?" For the first time in years, she looked at me not as a daughter she needed to protect, but as someone she believed could protect her. I put my hands on her shoulders, grounding her. "We build a case, quietly, carefully, and we expose him in a place where he cannot twist the truth." She looked confused. "Expose him where?" That was when the idea formed. Not in a courtroom, not in private, but in a room full of the very people Gary cared about most. his family, his friends, his social circle, the people whose respect he used as armor. Public exposure is the one thing a man like Gary cannot withstand. I began gathering everything: bank statements, mortgage documents, loan records, transfers to Tyler. I organized them chronologically, building a timeline of financial deceit. My mother watched in stunned silence as I laid out the evidence like pieces of a puzzle she had never seen before. I said, "We are not confronting him here. It will not work. He will twist it, blame me, claim you misunderstood. He has been protecting this illusion for years. He will not confess in private. But at the wedding events during the family gatherings, he will be surrounded by witnesses, people he cannot manipulate all at once, people whose opinions matter to him. That is where we show the truth." Her voice trembled. "You want to expose him in front of everyone?" "Yes, because he built his power on silence, and silence ends when truth is spoken out loud." She wiped her eyes. "And what happens then?" I closed the laptop. "Then he loses everything he used to control you. His power, his image, his leverage." She looked down at her trembling hands. "I hate that it has come to this." I nodded slowly. Justice always comes with a cost. The question is, who pays it? I gathered the documents neatly and placed them into a folder. As I slid it into my bag, I felt a shift inside me. This was not just about protecting my mother. This was about protecting every person Gary had manipulated, threatened, or drained, and it was about ending a pattern that had haunted our home for nearly 2 decades. For the first time, I understood that the confrontation at the dinner table was not the climax. It was only the beginning. Because the truth once uncovered has a way of demanding to be seen, and I was going to make sure everyone saw it. The night of Tyler's pre-wedding celebration arrived faster than I expected. The event was held at a rented hall near downtown Fayetteville, the kind of place people booked for anniversaries, retirement dinners, and family gatherings where everyone pretended everything was perfectly fine even when it was not. Strings of lights hung across the ceiling. Soft music played from speakers. Relatives I had not seen in years filled the room, dressed in their best clothes, sipping drinks, laughing, and exchanging stories. My mother stood near the entrance, gripping her purse tightly, her smile shaky and forced. She had agreed to support the plan, but I knew the idea of public confrontation terrified her. I squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You will not have to say anything," I whispered. "Just stand with me." She nodded, though her eyes kept scanning the room nervously. I carried a simple laptop bag on my shoulder. Inside it were the documents, bank statements, mortgage papers, loan summaries, and the records showing Tyler's debts, along with a short confidential report from a local officer who had dealt with him before. All organized, all undeniable. And on a small flash drive was something even stronger: a clean, compiled presentation. When I walked deeper into the room, I saw Gary holding court near a long buffet table surrounded by his brother's cousins and a few neighbors he had known for decades. He was laughing loudly, a drink in hand, enjoying the attention the same way a performer enjoys a spotlight. And then I heard my name. "Riley," he said with a dramatic scoff loud enough to draw glances. The little army psycho finally showed up. A few people chuckled awkwardly, not because they believed him, but because they did not know how else to react. Gary thrived on moments like that, when his voice dominated the room, when he could say anything and expect no one to challenge it. I stepped further inside. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw the folder in my hand. My mother stayed close behind me, her posture small but determined. Gary raised his voice again. "Everyone, this one right here, attacked my boy. Knocked him cold, unprovoked." She lost her mind. I heard murmurs. A few relatives exchanged glances. Some stared at me with hesitation, trying to decide what to believe. Tyler stood near the drink table, shifting uncomfortably. He had recovered physically, but not emotionally. His eyes avoided mine. His shirt collar was crooked as if he had dressed in a rush. Gary went on, building his story louder. "She thinks being in the army makes her better than everyone. Thinks she can hit whoever she wants. Thinks the rules do not apply to her." I let him talk. Let him build his little tower of lies tall enough for everyone to see. Then I stepped forward. "Enough." The word was not shouted, but it carried. Gary paused mid-sentence, confused by my tone. I set my bag on a nearby table and pulled out the laptop. A murmur went through the crowd. I connected it to the large projector screen the hall had set up for the event. Gary frowned. "What do you think you are doing?" "Showing the truth," I answered. And the room quieted in an instant. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward the screen. Even the music seemed to fade. I clicked the first slide. A bank statement. My mother's name? Balance nearly empty. A few people gasped softly. Gary stepped closer. "Turn that off. You have no right." But I continued. "This is my mother's primary account, and here are the withdrawals. Dates. Times. Transfers to accounts under your name. Thousands missing every month." The room grew still. Gary sputtered, trying to form words. "That means nothing." I showed the next slide. Mortgage records. The house being used as collateral for loans my mother never approved. Then another slide. Transfers labeled T. Holton. Payments clearly covering part of Tyler's debts. Then loan statements addressed to Tyler from lenders none of the family recognized. A few relatives whispered urgently. Someone in the back muttered, "Oh my Lord." Tyler swayed visibly, his face draining of color. His fiancée, who had been standing near him, stepped away, as if distance might erase the shame. My mother clasped her hands together, fighting tears. I kept going. The facts did not need embellishment. They spoke for themselves. Then I opened a short report from an officer who had noted prior incidents involving Tyler. Small confrontations, verbal threats, drunken behavior. Nothing dramatic, but enough to confirm a pattern. Not a single lie. Not a single exaggeration. Just truth. Heavy, quiet truth. When the final slide faded, the room was completely silent. You could hear breathing. You could hear clothes shifting. You could even hear Gary swallow hard. Someone near the dessert table whispered, "She had proof." Gary finally found his voice, or what was left of it. He lunged forward, pointing at me. "You think this scares me? You think you can embarrass me in front of my family? You ungrateful girl. You want to destroy this home." He took another step, face twisted with rage. His voice cracked with humiliation. "You think showing some papers changes anything? I am still the man of this house." I raised my voice just enough for everyone to hear. "This is not your house, Gary. You used it to feed your debts. You used my mother to pay for Tyler's mistakes. And you lied to everyone in this room." People looked at Gary now, not with sympathy, but with something closer to disgust. His brother muttered, "I knew something was wrong." His cousin shook her head. "I cannot believe this." Tyler looked ready to disappear. His pride shattered in front of the very people he wanted to impress. That was when Gary snapped completely. He surged toward me, his face red and twisted. "I will shut you up right now." He lifted his arm, reaching for me in a sudden aggressive motion, but I was already moving. My stance shifted, my feet grounded, my center lowered. In the space between his movement and impact, my training took over. Slow motion filled the room, though everything happened in seconds. As Gary swung his arm, I stepped diagonally to the side, just enough to evade contact. My left arm lifted, guiding his arm past my shoulder. My right hand caught his wrist firmly. Not violent, controlled, redirecting his energy. As his momentum carried him forward, I rotated my hips and applied a simple joint control technique, twisting just enough to break his balance. He collapsed to one knee, gasping in shock. I maintained the hold enough to immobilize him, but not enough to cause pain. I said loudly for everyone to hear, "Sir, step back." "You attempted to strike me." Everyone in the room saw his intent. Everyone saw the red in his eyes, the way he lunged, the way I neutralized him without force. Gasps filled the hall. A few relatives stood up. Someone whispered, "She stopped him like it was nothing." When I released him, he stumbled backward, landing on the floor. The humiliation hit him harder than the fall. The entire room erupted not in chaos, but in realization. They saw everything. The truth. The lies. The violence he tried to hide. His desperate final attempt to regain control. And his failure. Tyler stared at the floor, unable to look at anyone. His fiancée's mother whispered something to her, and the young woman stepped away, quietly pulling off her engagement ring. My mother covered her mouth, tears streaming, but this time they were not tears of fear. They were relief, liberation. Someone in the crowd said quietly, "She did the right thing." Another added, "He has been lying for years." When I stepped back from Gary, I felt none of the satisfaction he probably expected. It was not victory. It was justice. And justice is quieter than people think. The entire room had witnessed the truth. Gary's myth of control shattered. His reputation collapsed, his pride crushed under the weight of his own actions. And as I looked around at dozens of stunned faces, I realized this was the moment everything changed. Public exposure. The peak. The moment a toxic empire finally fell apart. The moment Gary hit the floor, the entire room split in two, as if someone had cracked the air down the center. The silence that followed was not just quiet. It was judgment taking shape. It was decades of whispered suspicions finally finding a voice. And then the backlash began. At first, it was murmurs, small, uncertain whispers drifting across the hall. But they grew louder as people processed what they had seen and, more importantly, what they had been ignoring for years. I watched Gary sit on the floor, stunned, breathing hard, his pride bleeding even if his body remained untouched. My mother stood near the table, her hands shaking but her eyes finally open wider than I had ever seen them. And Tyler leaned against the wall with a look that said he wished the floor would swallow him whole. The first voice to break the tension came from Gary's older brother. He had always been the quiet type, the one who kept distance from Gary's temper, but never said much. Now he stepped forward, pointing at Gary with disbelief. "You told us she attacked him," he said. "You said she was unstable. You lied to all of us." A few relatives nodded. One of Gary's cousins, a woman who had always defended him at family gatherings, looked genuinely horrified. "Gary, what is all this? You took loans against Linda's house. You put debt in her name. Is that true?" Gary sputtered, trying to rise to his feet. "Do not listen to her. She is twisting everything." "I did what I had to do for this family," his brother snapped. "Family does not hide loans. Family does not steal savings. Family does not lie about violence." Several people began whispering again this time, agreeing with each other, not with him. I saw years of his image crumble right there, the fake charisma, the loud confidence, the tough talk. All of it fell apart under the weight of public scrutiny. My mother wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the screen in shock. It was the first time she had seen everything at once. The withdrawals, the debts, the mortgage documents, the transfers covering Tyler's reckless spending. She whispered almost to herself, "I did not know. I never knew." Her voice was soft, but the pain behind it cut through the entire room. A few relatives approached her, offering comfort while shooting condemning looks at Gary. The ripple effect spread quickly. Someone muttered, "I had my doubts, but this is unreal." Another said, "I always felt something was wrong when he bragged about managing Linda's money." A man near the dessert table added, "He owes half the community. I bet this is not the end of it." Gary's face reddened with humiliation and fury. "Stop talking!" he shouted. "All of you stop talking! You have no idea what you are saying!" He tried to stand but stumbled again. His pride had taken more damage than his balance. Every eye in the room stayed fixed on him, watching the unraveling. And then the fiancé drama exploded. Tyler had been frozen in place the entire time, but the real blow came when his fiancée approached him, her expression cold and sharp. Her mother stood behind her, arms crossed. She looked at him for a long moment. "Tyler, is all of this true?" He swallowed. "I do not know what she showed. I mean, I did not ask Dad for everything. It is complicated." She shook her head. "Not complicated. Pathetic. You let your debt go into your future mother-in-law's account. You hid it. You lied about your finances. And you let your father attack your stepsister for telling the truth." Tyler tried to reach for her, but she stepped back immediately. "Do not. We are done." She slid the engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the table. Her mother nodded at her, and they both walked away without looking back. Tyler sank into a chair, his face drained of color. For once, he had no insults, no bravado, no fake confidence, just silence. Heavy, crushing silence. Gary saw it and something inside him cracked. He pointed at me, shaking with rage. "You destroyed this family! You did this!" I kept my voice steady. "No, Gary, you did this. All of it. Every debt, every lie, every ounce of chaos. People believed you because they trusted you, and you used that trust to control them." He looked around the room, searching for support, for anyone to stand with him, but everywhere he looked, people avoided his eyes. Some shook their heads, some whispered privately, some simply stared as if seeing the real him for the first time. He had lost the room, completely. I watched as the consequences rippled through every part of his life. His reputation shattered in a single evening, his standing in the family gone, the admiration he demanded stripped away. A man like Gary lived for perception, respect, fear. Without those, he was nothing but noise. My mother finally stepped forward, her voice fragile but clear. "I trusted you," she said. "I built my life with you. And you emptied my accounts. You lied every single day." Gary tried to speak, but no words came. Not any that made sense. My mother continued, "And you turned my daughter into your enemy simply because she would not bow to you." He stared at her with disbelief. "Linda, you cannot believe her over me. You are my wife." She closed her eyes. Not anymore. The room froze. When she looked at him again, there was no fear left, only exhaustion. Deep, long exhaustion, and strength. Quiet but undeniable strength. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. Gary took a step toward her, but several relatives moved subtly between them. The symbolism was unmistakable. He had lost even the illusion of authority. Meanwhile, Tyler sat hunched over, staring at the ring his fiancée had left behind. Someone whispered near him, "I hope this is your wake-up call." But Tyler only stared blankly, as if unable to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. Then the community ripple began. People stepped aside, whispering to one another. Someone said out loud, "Does his church know about this?" Another said, "The neighbors will talk for months." A third added, "I bet the lenders will show up soon." That last one hit Gary visibly. His debts had been scattered and secret. Now they were exposed and spoken about openly. Without silence, he had no shield. I stood quietly, letting the room absorb everything. This was not revenge. This was truth. Truth is heavier than accusations. Truth spreads faster than lies when finally given oxygen. As I watched the family divide into small groups, some comforting my mother, some consoling Tyler, some simply shaking their heads at Gary, I understood why older audiences find solace in stories where consequences arrive clearly and firmly. Because in real life, justice often moves slowly. But when it finally lands, it leaves no doubt. The party slowly dissolved into uncomfortable exits. People avoided Gary. Some avoided Tyler. They hugged my mother warmly. They gave me nods of respect. One older aunt squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for finally showing us." When the hall nearly emptied, Gary remained on the floor, leaning against a table, breathing hard, staring at the door as if trying to piece together the ruins of his authority. My mother walked beside me as we left, her steps unsteady, but her spine straighter than I had ever seen it. For the first time, she did not look trapped. She looked free. And Gary looked exactly like what he was, a man facing the consequences he had spent years avoiding. The backlash had begun, and it was only the beginning. It took exactly 1 month after the wedding meltdown for Gary to show up on my doorstep, and in a strange way, I was not surprised when I saw his truck pull into my driveway. People like Gary never truly go away. They retreat, they regroup, and then they convince themselves they deserve a second chance. They always come back when they want something. Not when they are sorry, not when they have changed, when they want. And the moment I saw him step out of that dented truck, shoulders slumped but still carrying that familiar entitled heaviness, I knew what this visit would be. Audacity wrapped in desperation. He walked up my driveway slowly, as if rehearsing his lines for a play he thought I would participate in. The sun was just starting to set behind the trees near Fort Liberty, and the warm orange light reflected off the porch railings, but none of the softness in the air reached him. His presence felt like a cold shadow on a warm day. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He stopped 2 feet from the steps and tried to smile, but it twisted awkwardly like his face was not used to the expression. "Riley," he began, voice low and hoarse. "We need to talk." I kept my tone flat. "About what?" He shifted, adjusting the jacket that looked a size too big from weight he had clearly lost. I could see the stress on him, the exhaustion and the shame, mixed with something uglier, resentment. "I just want my family back," he said. "Things have gotten out of hand." I nodded once slowly. "I am aware." He swallowed. "I know I said things I should not have. I know I acted out of anger, but you got to understand I was under a lot of pressure." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. He took it as an invitation to continue. "Look, I only ever wanted what was best for this family. I might have made mistakes, but my intentions were good." That line hit me like a weak punch. Not painful, just predictable. He rubbed his hands together, the gesture nervous and unconvincing. "Your mother misses you," he said. "She wants us to heal." I answered calmly. "Mom lives in Chapel Hill now. She is doing better than she has in years." He blinked clearly, not expecting me to know that. "That is good," he said quickly. "That is what I wanted, for her to get rest. But I need help too." There it was, the real reason. He looked up at me, eyes shiny with manufactured remorse. "I am in trouble, Riley, serious trouble. Debt collectors are after me. The bank is coming after the house. I need you to help me get back on my feet. Just a loan. Temporary." I kept my expression the same. "How much?" He hesitated, but only for a moment. 15,000. I nearly laughed, but held it in. Of course it was 15,000. The same amount he demanded I give Tyler. The same number he had screamed about at dinner. The number that represented his belief that I was nothing more than a walking bank account he felt entitled to withdraw from. "Why 15,000? I asked. He looked away. "I owe some people, and some payments got behind. But once I clear it, I swear, everything will go back to normal." "Normal," I repeated quietly. He nodded enthusiastically, sensing movement. "Yes. Family dinners, holidays, all of us back together, you and me and your mom and Tyler." I did not respond. The silence made him anxious. He moved a step closer onto the first porch step, as if trying to physically close the distance between his fantasy and my reality. "I know you did not mean to embarrass me," he said. "I know you were just upset, but you went too far. You exposed things that should have stayed private. That hurt me." His voice trembled, and he added softly, "I forgive you for that." That was the moment my patience evaporated. It was not the request for money. It was not the manipulation. It was the audacity to claim he was the one granting forgiveness. I looked him dead in the eyes. "You forgive me." He nodded, missing the danger in my tone entirely. "Of course. Family forgives." I took a single step forward until I stood in the center of my doorway, framed by the fading light. My voice was steady and cold. "Gary, you ordered your son to hit me. You hid debt in my mother's name. You drained her accounts. You tried to destroy my career. And you think you are here to forgive me." He froze. For the first time since arriving, he had no script, no line prepared, just the truth staring back at him. He tried to recover. "I did not mean those things. I was angry. I was stressed. You know how men get when the world is on their shoulders." That phrase flicked a switch inside me. Men on their shoulders. I had carried soldiers bleeding out in Humvee back seats. I had responded to domestic calls where women had bruises shaped like excuses. I had stood between violence and the innocent. I knew exactly what he was trying to do, and it disgusted me. I straightened my posture. Years of MP discipline flowed through my body and into my voice. "Gary, step away from my property. Now." He blinked, confused. "Riley, come on. We are family. I am asking for help. A little kindness." I repeated slowly so there would be no misunderstanding. "Step away from my property before I call the police." His eyes widened with real shock for the first time. "Do not do that. You would not." You would not call the police on me. I kept my gaze level. I am military police. What do you think I do for a living? His mouth opened and closed without sound. I saw the humiliation wash over him a second time. But this time, there was no audience, no relatives, no crowd. Just me and him and the truth he could not run from. I watched him realize that whatever power he once had, whatever control he believed he could exert, had ended the night of the rehearsal dinner. He whispered, "Please, I need help. I am drowning." I gave him the only answer he had earned. "That is not my problem." He took a shaky step back off the porch. His shoulders slumped further. His face sagged. All the arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow fear of a man who finally understood the consequences he had created. I stepped back into my doorway, hand on the frame. "Goodbye, Gary." He reached toward me, one last desperate attempt to reattach himself to the family he had shattered. But I closed the door, firm, final. On the other side, I heard him let out a broken noise, part frustration, part disbelief, part regret, but none of it was my responsibility anymore. His footsteps retreated down the porch steps across the driveway back to his truck. I waited until the engine started and the sound faded down the street before I breathed out slowly. The house fell silent, warm, and whole in a way it had never been when he dominated our world. And as the last echo of his presence disappeared, I realized something simple and powerful. Closure does not always arrive with shouting or confrontation. Sometimes it arrives with a single sentence. "Sir, step away from my property." And sometimes closure is the quiet sound of a door clicking shut. I knew the moment I watched Gary walk off my porch that the next step could not be emotional. It needed to be legal, clean, precise, final. My mother had spent years living in confusion wrapped in excuses that were fed to her slowly enough to feel normal. But now she had clarity, and clarity demands action. 1 week after Gary came to my house, I drove with my mother to a law office in downtown Fayetteville, a small brick building with polished windows and a brass plaque that read, "Mitchell and Crane Attorneys at Law." Our lawyer was a woman in her late 50s with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes sharp enough to read a person before reading a file. Her name was Attorney Margaret Crane. She shook my hand firmly, then turned to my mother with a softness that made my mother straighten her shoulders a little. She guided us into a private conference room where a thick folder already sat on the table. "Mrs. Holton," she began, "I reviewed everything your daughter sent me. These are not minor issues. This is financial abuse and coercive control." My mother looked down, her fingers twisting nervously. "I do not know how I let it happen." "You trusted him," Ms. Crane said gently. "People in love put faith in the wrong hands. That does not make you weak. It makes him accountable." She opened the folder, revealing documents we had compiled during the past month. Bank statements, mortgage papers, loan transactions, interest charges, and the worst of them all, accounts in my mother's name that she had never signed. Fraud. Plain and simple. I felt my jaw tighten. Every line of those papers represented money he had stolen, and trust he had destroyed. Ms. Crane adjusted her glasses. "We will file for an emergency injunction. That will freeze all shared accounts immediately. Once the accounts are frozen, the court will review the property dispute and the financial misconduct. Based on these documents," she tapped the papers lightly, "he will lose. And he will lose fast." My mother inhaled, trembling. "I am scared. I do not want him coming after me." I leaned gently against her shoulder. "That is why we are doing this with the law. You are protected now." Ms. Crane nodded. "The court takes domestic financial abuse very seriously. This is not a debate about he said, she said. This is a pattern of documented misuse." Within 30 minutes, my mother had signed everything. It felt like watching her reclaim her life page by page. A quiet strength I had not seen since childhood began returning to her eyes. That afternoon, Ms. Crane filed the emergency injunction electronically. Less than 24 hours later, a judge approved it. Gary's access to every bank account, credit line, and mortgage detail was frozen. He discovered it the hard way when he attempted a withdrawal at his local branch, and the teller quietly informed him the accounts were locked pending investigation. He called my mother 3 times. She did not answer. Then he called me. I let it ring until it stopped. Lawsuits do not move quickly in many states, but in North Carolina, cases of documented financial abuse, especially those with clear paper trails, move at a different pace. Fast, direct, no emotional grandstanding, no dramatic testimony, just evidence. And we had more than enough. 2 weeks later, we attended the hearing. I sat beside my mother in the courtroom, a clean, bright space with pale wooden benches and the faint smell of polished floors. Gary sat at the opposite table with a public defender because, as we learned, he could not afford private counsel anymore. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uneven as if he had cut it himself. When he saw me, he did not speak. He just glared the same glare he used to give me as a teenager when I dared speak up. But this time that glare held no authority. The judge entered an older man with a measured voice and a reputation for hating deception. Ms. Crane stood and presented everything with calm precision. No dramatics, no insults, just facts. Your Honor, for the past 5 years, Mr. Holton has hidden accounts, taken loans in his wife's name without her consent, and transferred funds into accounts controlled by himself and his son. She provided documents showing where signatures had been forged, where money had been withdrawn late at night, where mortgage payments had been redirected. Then she introduced evidence from the rehearsal dinner that had circulated quickly after the meltdown. Gary yelling, Tyler mocking, their aggression, their pattern. My mother was asked 2 simple questions. Did you authorize these accounts? No. Did you feel pressured or controlled in your marriage? Yes, that was enough. Gary stood attempting to defend himself. Your Honor, she knew. She always knew. She benefited from the money, too. She is making it look worse than it was. But his voice shook, his hands trembled, and his story had more holes than a training target. The judge raised a hand, silencing him. Mr. Holton, the evidence is overwhelming. This court finds you responsible for financial misconduct, coercive control, and unauthorized use of marital assets. My mother exhaled sharply. The judge continued. All accounts will remain frozen until fully separated. The marital home will be returned to Mrs. Holton. You will vacate the property within 10 days. Furthermore, you are prohibited from contacting her directly. Any communication will go through legal channels. Gary stared at the bench as if the words were foreign. 10 days, he whispered. That house is mine. The judge corrected him. No, that house belonged to your wife. You used it. You did not own it. Gary sat down slowly as if the weight of the ruling physically pushed him into the chair. After the hearing, we walked out of the courthouse into the cool afternoon air. My mother paused on the steps, her hands pressed together, her eyes watery but steady. Is it over? She asked. I wrapped an arm around her. It is over. Maybe not every detail, but the control, the fear, the weight of him. That is done. She nodded, not crying, not shaking, just breathing freely, for the first time in years. A week later, the keys to the house were officially registered back under her name. The locks were changed. The mortgage was transferred, her savings secured. A life stolen piece by piece, now returned in a single legal strike. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it signs documents in a quiet courthouse and hands a woman her future back. And as I watched my mother open her front door to a home that was finally hers again, I understood something simple. Military training taught me how to fight, but sometimes the greatest victories are won with paper, not fists. And this one belonged to her. I did not expect healing to have a sound, but I swear I heard it the first morning my mother woke up in her own house without Gary's presence hanging over her. It was quiet. Too quiet at first, the kind of quiet that used to bother her because she had spent years living inside loudness disguised as authority. For a long time, silence meant danger. Silence meant Gary was in a mood. Silence meant she needed to walk softer, breathe quieter, and avoid saying anything that might ignite him. But now that same silence meant something else. Peace. I arrived early that morning to check on her. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing her robe hands wrapped around a mug of hot tea, staring out the window. She looked fragile, but not broken. She looked like someone who had finally stopped running. "Morning," I said gently. She turned her head and smiled a soft, tired smile. "Good morning, sweetheart." She gestured at the chair across from her, so I sat down. I noticed the deep breaths. She kept taking the slow ones that came after months or years of holding too many things inside. I asked, "How does it feel?" She looked around at the kitchen, touching the mug, then the table, then the back of the chair, as if she were reacquainting herself with the world. "Strange," she whispered. "Strange but good." And then tears filled her eyes, not the panicked kind, not the frightened kind, but the kind that come when your mind finally stops bracing for impact. For years, my mother lived in what I can only describe as a fog. Gary kept her in a constant state of confusion, making her question her memory, her judgment, her worth. He twisted her reality until she believed she needed him to survive. But when the judge handed her back her house, something changed. It was like watching a heavy curtain lift after decades of darkness. Over the next few days, I stayed with her as she packed Gary's things into boxes, leaving them on the porch for legal pickup. Every box she taped shut was a small act of liberation. She taped the last one and let out a long breath. "Why did I let it go so far?" she asked quietly. I pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "Because people like him know exactly how to trap good people." "That does not make you weak, Mom. It makes you human." She wiped her cheeks. "I feel stupid. You should feel proud," I said. "You got out. You survived him. You fought back." She nodded slowly, letting the truth settle. Getting out of a toxic relationship is not a moment. It is a process, and we were at the beginning of hers. I made a plan for the next few weeks, one that came from years of MP training responding to domestic calls where I had seen victims rebuild piece by piece. Step 1, get her back in control of her life through routines. Step 2, give her mobility. Independence needs wheels. Step 3, move her someplace new where the ghosts cannot reach her. Over the next week, we started small. I helped her sketch a daily schedule: meals, walks, paperwork, reading time. Then we moved to the bigger things. The first time she opened her own online banking account with no one looking over her shoulder, she cried. The good kind of tears. When she logged onto a utilities website and changed everything into her name, it was like watching her reclaim her existence. But the breakthrough moment happened when we went car shopping. Her old sedan was rusted and unreliable, something Gary always promised to replace if she behaved better. He dangled it like a reward. So we went to a dealership in Chapel Hill, a bright, clean place where I knew the staff from years of working with local law enforcement. The salesman greeted her politely and asked, "What are you looking for today?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked at me eyes wide like she was waiting for someone to answer for her. I shook my head gently. "Your choice, Mom." She inhaled with something that was almost fear, but also excitement. "I want something safe," she said. "Something dependable. Something that gets me where I need to go without worrying." The salesman smiled. "We have plenty of those." Watching my mother test drive a car by herself was like watching a bird realize it could fly again. When she pulled back into the lot, she gripped the steering wheel for several seconds, eyes shining. "I like it," she whispered. Then she corrected herself. "No, I want it." That sentence may not sound like much to anyone else, but to me, it was monumental. Want. Not ask permission for. Not hope Gary approved of. Want. She completed the purchase with my support, but the decision was fully hers. The next step was moving her out of Fayetteville. Every corner here held a memory, both good and poisoned. I suggested Chapel Hill, a place with calmer energy close to support and far enough from Gary to let her breathe. She hesitated at first. "I have lived here so long. I do not know how to start over." "You are not starting over," I told her. "You are starting free." We visited a small townhouse near the botanical gardens. It had a shaded porch, a bright living room, and a kitchen full of sunlight. Mom walked through each room, slowly touching the counters, the walls, the door frames. When she stood in the backyard looking at the quiet trees, she whispered, "This feels like mine." It took 2 weeks to move her, but the transformation in her was visible every single day. Her voice grew stronger, her gaze steadier. She laughed more freely. She slept without nightmares. One evening, while we unpacked, she found a box labeled Christmas. She opened it and held one of her old ornaments gently in her hands. She looked at me. "I forgot I used to decorate with joy," she said. I leaned against the counter, smiling. That joy is coming back. Sometimes liberation is not loud. It is quiet mornings in a new town. It is the first grocery list you write without fear. It is sitting in your own living room without preparing excuses. It is visiting a park because you want to. Mom started knitting again, something Gary always called a waste of time. She joined a book club. She bought new curtains. She went to the farmer's market every Saturday. And one afternoon, as she and I walked through a Chapel Hills street fair, she reached for my hand the way she used to when I was little. "I cannot believe I am living again," she said softly. "Yes, Mom, you are." Her healing was not perfect. Some days memories returned. Some days she apologized for things she no longer had to apologize for. But each day she reclaimed more of herself. And watching her do that taught me something powerful. Liberation does not happen the moment you leave someone. It happens the moment you choose yourself. And my mother had finally chosen herself. And for the first time in a long time, she was free. When everything finally settled for my mother and the legal paperwork was complete, I returned to Fort Liberty, expecting to slip back into normal duty life. But nothing about my return was normal. The moment I stepped onto base, I could feel something different in the air. Soldiers nodded at me with a kind of acknowledgement I was not used to. A few MPs I had trained nodded respectfully. One even said quietly, "Good work, Captain," before walking past. I wondered what exactly they knew until I reached the MP headquarters and found a message taped to my locker, instructing me to report to the commanding officer's office at 1400. My stomach tightened, but not from fear. From curiosity. The internal investigation was supposed to take another week, but apparently decisions had been made early. I walked into the office exactly on time. Colonel Reeves sat behind his desk, his posture crisp, his uniform immaculate. He was a man known for his fairness, but also for his intolerance of misconduct. I saluted. He returned it, then motioned for me to sit. "Captain Monroe." He began folding his hands on the desk. "We have concluded our review." My heartbeat steadied automatically into that military calm that lives in the spine of every soldier. "Yes, sir." He nodded slowly, studying me. "Your stepfather contacted us multiple times. He filed accusations through civilian channels and attempted to escalate them through our office." I remained silent, letting him continue. His claims were inconsistent and unsupported. In contrast, everything you provided was clear. Body cam footage, witness statements, contextual evidence. You responded to imminent harm with proportional force. And you did not escalate the situation. My jaw loosened slightly with relief. "Thank you, sir." He leaned back. "I have seen soldiers break under domestic pressure, unpredictable situations, emotional manipulation. You did not. You handled a domestic threat exactly as trained." He said the words with a level of respect that felt heavier than any metal. He opened a drawer and placed a small velvet box on the desk. I recognized it immediately. A commendation medal. I blinked. "Sir, I do not think I did anything unusual." He smiled faintly. "That is what makes it commendable, Captain. You acted with discipline in a situation that would push most people beyond control." He slid the box toward me. "And that is why the board has approved something else." He pulled out a second document. When he handed it to me, I felt my breath stop. It was a recommendation for promotion. Major Riley Monroe. I stared at the words, letting them sink into my bones. Major. In the Army, that rank is not simply a step up. It is a shift in weight, a shift in responsibility, a recognition of leadership, the kind earned not by talking, but by doing. I looked up slowly. "Sir, this is..." He raised a hand. "Earned. Completely earned. You have been exemplary in field operations, security protocols, and crisis response. Your record speaks for itself. This incident simply reminded the board of it." For a moment, I did not speak. I felt pride rising through my chest, but also something deeper, something I had not felt in a long time. Validation. My childhood family had spent years calling me extreme, stubborn, difficult, dramatic, angry, unpredictable. They built a version of me that served their excuses, but the Army had built a very different version, the correct version. The real one. Strong, capable, disciplined, trusted. My voice came out steady. "Thank you, sir. It is an honor." He nodded and stood. "You will be briefed formally in 2 weeks. Until then, keep performing at your usual standard." "Dismissed, Captain." I saluted him. He returned the salute with that same quiet respect. When I exited the office, the hallway looked the same as always. Faded paint, overhead lights humming faintly, boots echoing down the corridor. But I felt different in it. Like the walls themselves recognized me. Like the base was welcoming me back not as the same Captain Monroe, but as the soldier I had fought to become. That evening, a few MPs invited me to the rec hall for a small celebration. They had clearly heard the news even before I walked in, because one of them handed me a cup of coffee and said, "Major Monroe has a nice ring to it." I laughed, shaking my head. "It is not official yet." They shrugged. "It will be, and you deserve it." I sat with them for an hour, listening to stories about patrols, barracks, pranks, and near misses on the job. Ordinary military life. The kind of life where duty makes sense. The kind of world built on structure, not manipulation. And somewhere in that hour, while watching my team joke and argue and tease each other, I realized something important. The Army had become the closest thing I ever had to a stable family. Later that week, the promotion news reached my extended relatives through the grapevine, and of course it reached Gary. My cousin called me laughing so hard she could barely speak. "They are saying you are crazy again," she said between chuckles. I smiled. Of course they are. When toxic people lose control, they do not apologize. They rewrite the story. The difference now was simple. My achievements were not up for debate. My rank could not be diminished by gossip, and the Army did not care about Gary's version of events. It cared about discipline, professionalism, truth. A few days later, I received a message from Tyler. It was a single line. "Congrats on the promotion." I stared at it for a long moment. Not angry, not emotional, just reflective. I replied, "Thank you." That was it. Nothing more. No invitations to reconnect, no attempts to rebuild what was never real. The military had taught me something my family never did. Your value does not change based on who fails to see it. The following week, I attended a ceremony where the medal was officially pinned to my uniform. When my name was called, I stepped forward, head high, shoulders square, the way Army training instills deep into your bones. As the applause echoed through the room, something unexpected flickered in my chest, not pride exactly, but peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you walked through fire and did not lose yourself. When I returned to my quarters that night, I placed the commendation medal on my desk next to the promotion papers. I sat down in the quiet room, exhaling slowly. My family had called me reckless, stubborn, too serious, dramatic, even dangerous. But my commanding officer called me something else. Professional, and in the end, that mattered more than anything they ever said. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the calm settle. Major Monroe. It felt right. It felt earned. And it felt like the beginning of something bigger. My family had tried to break me. The Army had built me. And now, I finally knew which one I belonged to. It happened on a Thursday night in late autumn, the kind of night where the clouds hang low over Chapel Hill and the air feels swollen with approaching rain. I had just finished my shift at Fort Liberty and was driving toward my mother's townhouse when my phone buzzed. It was the security system notification. Motion detected at back door. My stomach tightened. Mom was at her book club that evening. No one was supposed to be home. I turned onto her street and immediately saw it. A familiar truck parked 2 houses down. Headlights off, engine running low. Gary. I pulled into the driveway quietly. Heart steady, not racing, but sharpening the way it always did right before an operation. The rain began in thin drops tapping the windshield as I stepped out. I moved to the side of the house, staying in the shadows until I reached the backyard gate. I heard rustling metal scraping a muffled grunt. When I turned the corner, I saw him crouched at the back door, trying to force the lock with a crowbar. He was soaked already from the drizzle, but kept working like a man possessed. His movements were frantic, sloppy, desperate. For a second, I just watched. This was the same man who once strutted around calling himself the protector of the family. Now he was breaking into a house that no longer belonged to him, hunting for documents he believed would save him. I stepped forward. Gary. He froze, straightened slowly, turning his head like he already knew who the voice belonged to. Riley, he said, breathless, I need to get something. It is mine. You need to walk away. I kept my voice firm but controlled. You are trespassing. He shook his head, rain dripping from his hair. No, that woman took everything from me. I need those papers. If I get them, I can fix this. You cannot fix years of abuse with a stolen file. He jabbed the crowbar toward the lock with renewed anger. Do not talk to me like you are some authority. I am still in this family. You do not get to decide what I can and cannot take. I stepped closer, boots silent on the wet grass. You are violating a court order. Leave now or I intervene. He laughed a strange, cracked sound. You think you can stop me? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You ruined my life. He rushed toward the door, pushing the crowbar harder. The glass creaked under the pressure. That was enough. I moved, not with rage, not with adrenaline, with training. I closed the distance between us in 2 steps. When he spun around, swinging the crowbar toward me in panic, my hands were already in motion. First, I redirected the arc of his arm, guiding it past me so the momentum emptied itself into the air. His balance shifted just enough to expose the opening. I caught his wrist with my right hand, locked it tight, and rotated his arm behind his back smoothly. Not harsh, not violent, just precise. He yelped, grabbing at my forearm with his free hand, but the wet ground only made him slip. As soon as his knee dipped, I transitioned into a controlled takedown, sweeping his support leg just enough to bring him to the ground without injury. His body hit the grass with a thud, muffled by the rain-soaked earth. I knelt just enough to keep weight on his shoulder, keeping his arm locked. You are under restraint, I said, keeping my tone even. Do not move. Gary thrashed uselessly. You cannot do this. You cannot arrest me. I leaned closer. I am military police, and you are committing a crime in front of me. His breath came out in ragged, angry huffs. I knew this was not pain. It was humiliation. That was always the thing he hated most. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the cuffs, and secured his wrists behind his back with clean, efficient clicks. Once he was immobilized, I used my free hand to call local police. This is Captain Riley Monroe. I have a confirmed break-in attempt at 224 Willow Bend. Suspect restrained awaiting units, the dispatch answered quickly, patrol en route. Gary groaned beneath me, sputtering angrily. Your mother owes me. She owes me everything. She would be nothing without me. I exhaled slowly, rain dripping down my face. She is more without you than she ever was with you. The sirens grew audible, cutting through the rain. When the patrol car turned the corner, the blue lights washed across the wet yard. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Daniels, someone I had worked with before, raised his eyebrows slightly when he saw the scene. Evening, Captain, I nodded. Evening. I lifted my knee off Gary's shoulder and the officers moved in, taking control of him. Gary shouted the moment they touched him. She assaulted me. She attacked me. She set me up. Officer Daniels did not even look at me. Sir, we saw the crowbar. We know about the court order. You need to calm down. But Gary kept yelling. She ruined everything. She is the reason my life fell apart. The officers walked him toward the patrol car, but his voice only got louder. You hear me? She is crazy. She is dangerous. She is a liar. And then right in front of the flashing blue lights, he slipped on the wet pavement and stumbled hard against the side of the car. A few neighbors who had stepped outside to see what was happening gasped quietly. One whispered, Is that the same man from the scandal at the party? Another said, Looks like he still has not learned. Public humiliation round 2, this time with police lights instead of party chandeliers. Officer Daniels secured him in the back seat and closed the door. He walked back to me, shaking his head. Same guy who tried to blame you last month. Some folks never change. I nodded quietly. Thanks for responding quickly. Always, he said. We will handle the rest. The patrol car pulled away, carrying Gary into another round of consequences he had earned all by himself. I stood alone in the rain, the water cooling, the heat still lingering in my muscles. When the blue lights disappeared down the street, I finally exhaled. Not relief. Resolution. I walked to the back door and touched the lock he had almost broken. Drops of rain slid down the glass. My mother's house stood strong behind it, safe, quiet, still hers. The storm had not ended outside, but inside, the war was over. And this time, nobody would rewrite the story. Tyler's downfall did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened piece by piece, the same way arrogance always collapses when it finally meets the real world. After the wedding scandal, his fiancée returned. The ring quietly left the hall and never spoke to him again. Her mother called the next morning to tell him they would not tolerate being tied to a family drowning in debt and public humiliation. Tyler begged, left messages, sent flowers, showed up at her workplace, but she refused all of it. She had seen the truth played out on a projector screen, and once you see truth, you cannot unsee it. Losing the engagement was only the first fracture. The second came when his employer called him in for a meeting. He worked at a local sporting goods store, the kind of place that tolerated lateness and attitude but not public scandal. His manager told him bluntly customers had complained about his behavior for months, and after the viral clips from the rehearsal dinner, their corporate office did not want the liability. Tyler tried to blame me, of course. He said it was my fault for humiliating him, that I set him up, that I ruined his reputation. His manager responded with the kind of tired expression I had seen many times in my career. "Son, you ruined your own reputation." They let him go on the spot. Tyler moved back into a small apartment he could barely afford. Without the help of Gary's frozen accounts, the bills piled up faster than he could keep track of them. Loan notices, overdue utilities, credit card late fees, his truck payment, everything hit at once. Losing control scared him, and scared men often lash out instead of learning. Over the next month, he spiraled. The relatives who once praised him now avoided him. Neighbors whispered. The fiancé's family told others about the financial chaos he had hidden. And the embarrassment consumed him. But the moment I knew things had gone from bad to worse was the night he showed up at my place. It was a cold December evening, rain tapping softly against the windows as I returned from base. I set my bag down, poured myself a cup of hot tea, and finally sank into the quiet. Then came the knock. Slow, hesitant, unsteady. I frowned and went to the door. When I opened it, Tyler stood there. Clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, hair unwashed, the smell of stale alcohol clinging to him like a second skin. "Riley," he said, voice cracking. "I need to talk." I did not move aside. "What do you want?" He ran a hand through his hair, shaking slightly. "I messed up. Everything is falling apart. I lost my job. I am behind on rent. People are talking. I could lose my truck." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. Tyler shifted nervously. And then he said the line I knew was coming, the line that always comes from people who never take responsibility. "Could you please talk to people for me? Put in a word somewhere. Tell them I am not a bad guy. Military police, employers, anyone. Just help me get back on my feet." His eyes darted to mine, searching for sympathy. I felt none. I kept my voice even. "Tyler, I have already given you more chances than you ever gave me." He stiffened. "What does that mean?" "It means you bullied me for years, called me useless, mocked my job, tried to hit me because your father told you to. It means you stood beside Gary while he drained Mom's accounts. It means you watched him abuse her and said nothing." His jaw tightened. "I did not know." "You knew enough," I said quietly, "and you chose to do nothing about it because it benefited you." He swallowed hard. "I am trying to fix things okay. I just need you to help me." I stepped back toward the door. "Fixing your life is your job." "Not mine." His expression twisted into anger. "So you think you are better than me now, just because you wear a uniform?" I met his glare calmly. "I do not think I am better. I think I am responsible for my actions, something you have never learned." His chest rose and fell sharply. His hands shook. He started to say something else, but I opened the door and stepped inside. "Goodbye, Tyler." I closed the door. Just like that. No drama, no shouting, no tears. The next morning, I heard from a neighbor who saw him leaving my street, barely able to walk straight. He had been drinking before he even came to my house. Over the next 2 weeks, word of Tyler's situation spread. He pawned electronics, sold tools, borrowed from acquaintances who quickly realized he could not pay them back. His debt deepened, his anger grew, and he blamed me for every piece of it. Then came the night everything snapped. I got the call around 11:30 from Officer Daniels, the same officer who had responded during the break-in. "Captain, we have your stepbrother in custody." I closed my eyes briefly. What happened? DUI. He was swerving near the highway, nearly clipped another car. He failed the field test immediately. He asked that we call you. I drove down to the station, not because I wanted to help him, but because closure sometimes needs a witness. When I walked into the holding area, Tyler was slumped on the bench behind the bars, his face pale, his hands shaking. When he saw me, he straightened weakly. "Riley, thank God. Talk to them. Tell them I am not a criminal." I stood outside the bars, arms crossed. "Tyler, you drove drunk. That is not an accident. That is a decision." He shook his head violently. "I did not mean to. I just needed to clear my head. I did not want things to get worse." I sighed slowly. "This is what worse looks like. You built it yourself." He pressed his hands to his face, trying to steady his breathing. "Please, help me. They cannot charge me. They cannot." I let my voice go cold. "You once tried to hit me because Gary told you to. You drained Mom's accounts. You let her live in fear. You never owned any of your mistakes, and now this is the result." Tyler looked up, eyes wide with panic. "So you are going to leave me here? You are my sister. You owe me." I shook my head. "I owe you nothing." His breath hitched. I stepped forward and said the last piece quietly but firmly. "I gave you more chances than you ever gave me, and you wasted every single one." He stared at me stunned, as if the truth had finally cut deeper than any punishment. Officer Daniels approached with a clipboard. "We are charging him. First offense DUI, likely probation and mandatory classes. Could be worse, but it will go on his record." Tyler crumpled on the bench. Not crying, just deflated like something inside him had finally cracked. I nodded to the officer. "Thank you for letting me know." I turned to leave. As I reached the door, he called my name again, voice thin. "Riley, please." But I did not turn back. Actions have consequences. And Tyler had finally reached his. When I stepped outside, the cool night air felt steady against my skin. Not triumphant, not cruel, just honest. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, like the sound of a jail door closing on a man who spent his whole life avoiding responsibility. And as I walked back to my car, I understood something clearly. Tyler was not ruined by me. He was ruined by the choices he kept making long after the world gave him chances to do better. His fall was not revenge. It was gravity, and gravity never misses. Peace is not something that arrives with fanfare. It does not knock loudly or announce itself with flashing lights. It does not come with applause or recognition. For me and for my mother, it arrived quietly in small moments that slowly stitched together a new life. The first sign came on a crisp January morning when I drove to my mother's townhouse in Chapel Hill to help her set up a garden bed she had always dreamed of. When I pulled into her driveway, she was already outside, wearing a soft blue sweater, kneeling beside a tray of seedlings. The winter sun stretched gently across her face as she hummed under her breath. A peaceful hum. A hum from a woman who no longer feared the sound of footsteps or the tone of a voice behind her. When she looked up at me, she smiled with a softness I had not seen since childhood. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep well." I nodded. "Better than I have in a long time." She chuckled lightly. "Must be all that rank you are climbing." I groaned, laughing. "Mom, please do not start calling me Major before the paperwork is official." She shrugged dramatically. "I am just ahead of the curve." We spent the next hour kneeling in the dirt planting cabbage rosemary and a few early spring flowers. She moved with ease, confidence, and a renewed sense of ownership. At one point, she paused, sat back on her heels, and said softly, "I never realized how much life I lost to him, how much of myself vanished." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You got it back." She nodded. "I did." But she looked out at her new home, her new garden, her new beginning. The truth is, I did not just escape him, I escaped the version of myself he created. And now I get to rebuild the real me. Watching her say those words, watching her reclaim her identity piece by piece filled something deep inside me, something I did not realize had been missing until that moment. I had spent years trying to protect her. Now she was protecting herself. That is real healing, not the loud victories, the quiet ones. When spring arrived, she signed up for 2 classes at the community center, one for pottery and one for cooking. She made friends, women her age, living new lives after hard marriages, women who understood her without needing long explanations. They invited her to lunches, farmers markets, movie nights. For the first time in years, she had community that supported her. She began wearing brighter colors again, floral blouses, soft dresses, light scarves, clothing Gary always called silly or childish. She cooked meals she loved instead of meals he demanded. She walked to the park every morning, and she laughed. Real full laughter. Not the forced polite laugh she used to give to keep the peace. One afternoon after her pottery class, we sat in her living room drinking tea. She examined her first handmade bowl proudly. It was uneven, but she smiled at it like it was a trophy. "I never thought I would feel this safe again," she said. "Thank you, Riley. Thank you for pulling me out." I shook my head gently. "You walked out on your own, Mom. I just opened the door." She reached over, squeezed my hand, and said something I will never forget. "You became the woman I needed when I was too scared to be her." That moment stayed with me long after I drove back to Fort Liberty. Back on base, life continued with its steady rhythm: early PT, deployment briefings, patrol coordination, field training, paperwork stacks that never ended. But something inside me had shifted. A few weeks after Tyler's arrest and Gary's break-in attempt, I received a formal letter assigning me to a new role: lead instructor for military police training rotation. It meant working directly with new recruits, teaching them fundamentals, reinforcing discipline, and preparing them for domestic operations. I reported to the training grounds on a warm spring morning. Rows of cadets stood straight backs, shoulders squared, boots polished so intensely the sun reflected off them. They looked nervous, eager, determined. Seeing them reminded me of myself at 19 years old, stepping onto base for the first time with fear in my chest and fire in my eyes. Sergeant Miller, my second in command, greeted me with a salute. "Morning, Captain. Recruits are ready for the briefing." I stepped forward. My boots touched the training field and a wave of memory hit me. All the long hours, all the drills, all the sweat, all the mistakes corrected with stern voices and second chances. I took my place in front of the recruits. "Good morning, soldiers." They responded in unison. "Good morning, ma'am." I scanned the group, recognizing expressions of doubt and determination. Each one of them had a story, a past, a reason for being here. Just like I did, I began. "You are not here to become heroes. You are not here to prove something to your families or the world. You are here because you chose a path that requires discipline, responsibility, and control. You do not get to lash out when you are angry. You do not get to escalate when things go wrong. You do not get to lose focus because someone provokes you." The room was silent except for their breathing. You train to become the line between chaos and safety, and sometimes that chaos is not a battlefield. Sometimes it is a living room. Sometimes the person causing harm is family. They looked at me with wide eyes. I continued, "You are not defined by what people say about you. You are defined by what you do when things get difficult, what you do when things get personal, what you do when someone tries to break you." I saw a few heads nod slowly. I ended with a line my commanding officer had once said to me: "Professionalism is not what you do when people watch. It is what you do when they do not." That became my mantra. Over the next few months, I trained them in emergency response de-escalation tactics, unarmed combat, and domestic threat assessment. I taught them the legal protocols, the calm commands, the strategic holds, the controlled takedowns. The very techniques I had once used to defend myself in my mother's dining room and again in her backyard in the rain. A few weeks later, one of the recruits approached me after training. "Ma'am," he said, "I heard about what happened with your family." I paused, waiting for whatever question was coming. He continued quietly, "I just want to say thanks for showing us what strength really looks like. It is not violence. It is control. I nodded. He was right. My family had called me dramatic, unstable, dangerous, too emotional. But the Army had given me the vocabulary to understand my actions. Controlled, disciplined, professional. And in training these recruits, I realized something important. I had healed too. Not in sudden ways, in small ways, in the steadiness of routine, in the quiet of barracks at night, in the laughter shared with fellow MPs after long shifts, in the pride that came with watching recruits grow into soldiers. And whenever I drove to Chapel Hill to visit my mother, I felt the same peace bloom inside me. She would greet me with a warm smile, a plate of cookies, sometimes even a new pottery bowl she was proud of. I would tell her about training my recruits. She would tell me about her knitting group or the new book she was reading or the neighbor who brought her fresh tomatoes. We no longer spoke about Gary. He no longer belonged in our conversations. One evening, she said, "It feels like we both finally exhaled after holding our breath for years." She was right. As summer approached, I sat outside her townhouse with her on the porch, sipping iced tea, watching fireflies rise from the grass. The sky was deep blue, fading into twilight. She leaned her head gently against my shoulder. "You know," she said, "for the first time in my life, I feel truly safe." And it was in that moment, with the sound of cicadas humming and the smell of fresh earth around us, that I realized something. My story was not about revenge. Not really. It was about recovery, about choosing strength over fear, about walking away from those who tried to break us, and standing taller because of it. I looked out at the peaceful street, the shadows of trees swaying in the evening breeze. My life had not been easy. My childhood had been marked by disrespect, control, and cruelty. But those years no longer defined me. I was not the girl they underestimated. I was Captain Riley Monroe, military police, a soldier trusted by her command, respected by her peers, and standing firmly in a life she built herself. And as the porch light glowed softly around us, I realized I had finally reached a place I once thought impossible. A life where peace was no longer borrowed. It was earned. Justice does not always crash through the door. Most of the time, it moves in quiet circles, returning to the people who earned it at the exact moment they are strong enough to hold it. For us, justice arrived in 3 small waves, each one closing a chapter we had survived. The first wave came one mild morning in early fall when my mother forwarded me an email from her attorney with the subject line, "Court Update." She called me moments later, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. "It is done, Riley. The judge ruled." Gary accepted a plea agreement for unlawful entry, financial misconduct, and violation of a protective order. He received 2 years of supervised probation, mandatory participation in a domestic violence intervention program, and a permanent restraining order. He would not step near her home again. He would not call. He would not hover like a shadow waiting for weakness. His consequences were public, which mattered to my mother more than she admitted. For years, she had been dismissed, ignored, talked over, treated like her pain was imaginary. Now, an entire courtroom acknowledged it. She told me softly, "I do not feel happy. I feel free, and that is better." The second wave came from Tyler. I learned he entered rehab after his DUI arrest, voluntarily this time, not because of pressure or shame, but because the spiral finally frightened him. One evening, Officer Daniels stopped me outside the station while I was picking up documents. "Heard from your stepbrother," he said. "He checked himself into a 90-day program. Says he is trying to get right." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me. I did not visit Tyler. I did not write. I did not hold on to anger either. He was taking responsibility. That was his journey, not mine. His choices no longer had the power to bruise my world, and without that power, he was simply another adult learning what it meant to be accountable." The third wave came to my mother's doorstep in the form of quiet mornings, peaceful dinners, and a new rhythm of life built entirely on her terms. Linda Holton lived in a home without fear, without footsteps that made her flinch, without doors slammed in anger. She grew tomatoes in her little garden. She read on the porch every evening. She drove to visit her new friends. She lived. Actually lived. And sometimes as I sat in her living room drinking tea while she talked excitedly about a knitting pattern or a recipe she wanted to try, I felt a warmth rise inside me. not pride, gratitude. She did not just leave him. She found herself. She became her own rescue. Those victories do not get medals, but they should. Meanwhile, my life settled into something steady and strong back at Fort Liberty. Training new MPs filled my days with purpose. I spent mornings in the field teaching recruits how to stay calm under pressure, afternoons reviewing reports, and evenings running drills until the sun dipped behind the long line of pines. My promotion to major came through officially, and during the ceremony, my commanding officer shook my hand and said quietly, "You carried yourself with integrity. That is leadership." Standing there in my uniform surrounded by soldiers who respected me because of my actions, not my history, I realized something important. My family never knew who I was, but the Army did. My strength grew in the spaces they doubted. My discipline formed in the moments they mocked, and my courage sharpened in the silence where they expected me to break. On the first cool morning of October, a thin fog rolled across the base, making the world look soft and pale. I finished early training and walked alone toward the parade field. The American flag rose above the base pole, stretching high into the quiet sky. I stopped at the edge of the field, letting the wind brush against my face, the air cool and clean. The morning sun glinted against the metal of my uniform. For a long moment, I just stood there, taking in everything that had changed, everything that had healed, everything that had ended. Somewhere far behind me, Gary's life had shrunk to court check-ins and mandatory classes. Somewhere deeper in the city, Tyler was working through rehab, learning how to face the man he had become. And somewhere in a small townhouse filled with sunlight, my mother was probably making tea, humming softly as she planned her day. Peace. Not loud, dramatic peace. Quiet, earned peace. I let out a slow breath, watching it drift into the air and disappear. Then a thought came to me, clear, simple, and calm. Justice is not loud. It is steady, and it always arrives. I stood there a moment longer, letting the message settle into me from the soles of my boots all the way up into the morning sky. Then I turned and walked back toward the training grounds, ready for whatever came next, fully aware that I was stepping not into survival, but into a future I had built with courage, discipline, and truth. A future finally free. Have you ever faced a family member who tried to break you, the kind of person who used their voice, their anger, or their control to make you feel small, even when you knew you were meant to stand taller than their expectations? Maybe it was a parent who never believed in you, or a sibling who treated your kindness like weakness, or someone who thought they had the right to decide your worth simply because they were louder or older, or had been handed more power than they deserved. Maybe it happened years ago. Maybe you still feel the echo of their words in moments when the room gets too quiet. Maybe you remember the exact day when you realized their behavior was not love, it was control. Or maybe you are still trying to name what you went through, because sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought inside a home where everyone pretends nothing is wrong. If you have ever had to stand your ground against someone who expected you to bend or break just to keep them comfortable, then I want you to know this: you are not alone. There are people across the world who have carried the same weight, the same silence, the same shaken breath before speaking, the same trembling hands when they finally said no. Sometimes standing up for yourself does not mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it looks like stepping away, quietly closing a door, changing a lock, filing a document, telling the truth out loud for the first time, or simply saying enough. In those moments, even the small ones require more courage than most people will ever understand. Maybe you had relatives who chose not to see what was happening, who looked the other way, who told you to keep the peace, who said family is family as if that meant you owed your life to someone who hurt you. Maybe you were blamed or dismissed or told you were too emotional, too dramatic, too sensitive, too much. If you ever felt those words carve into you, I want you to hear this clearly. You were not wrong for protecting yourself. You were brave, truly brave. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is choose a different path than the one their family forced on them. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is learn to breathe again after years of holding their breath. And if you are reading this and you feel a tug in your chest, if you feel like some part of this story touched a place inside you where old wounds live, then your experience matters. Your story matters. The way you survived matters. The way you continue to rise matters. And if you feel comfortable, if you feel safe enough to share even a small piece of your journey, I invite you to leave it in the comments. Not because you owe anyone details, not because your pain needs validation, but because someone out there might be living a chapter you already survived. Someone might need to hear that healing is possible, that leaving is possible, that standing your ground is possible. Someone might be searching for a sign that it is not their fault, that what they are feeling is real, that the confusion they live in has a name. Sometimes a story can be a lifeline. Sometimes it can be the spark that helps someone else find the strength to choose themselves. And if you are in a place where your wounds are still fresh, if speaking about them feels too heavy or too raw, that is okay too. Healing does not follow a schedule. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to speak softly or loudly or not at all. You are allowed to protect your heart until it feels ready to open again. Just know this, even if you do not share, even if you read in silence, you are seen. You are valued, and you are stronger than the person who tried to break you. Life has a way of circling back, delivering justice quietly, steadily, eventually. It may not arrive the way you imagined. It may not come in dramatic fireworks or grand apologies. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it looks like strength returning to your voice. Sometimes it looks like waking up one morning and realizing the fear is gone. So if you have ever faced a family member who tried to break you but you stood your ground in whatever way you could, and in whatever way you needed to, I want to say sincerely, I am proud of you, and if you feel comfortable, share your story. Someone out there might need to hear it.